Welcome back to the route. Keep your pace steady, stay mindful of the dogs and the traffic, and let us dive into what many consider the most challenging part of the reading exam. We are mastering Module ACC RD 2.4, Analyzing Arguments. If the previous modules were about understanding the story or the author's feelings, this module is about understanding the logic. Analyzing an argument is like being a structural engineer. You aren't looking at the paint on the walls or the furniture in the rooms. You are looking at the foundation, the steel beams, and the bolts that hold the whole building together. On the accuplacer, you are being asked to determine if an author's building is sturdy or if it is about to collapse. To get a top score in this module, you have to learn to deconstruct an argument into its three core components: the claim, the evidence, and the assumption. The claim is the roof of the building. It is the main point the author wants you to accept as true. For example, the city should invest in a new public library. The evidence is the pillars that hold up the roof. These are the facts, statistics, and expert testimonies the author provides. For example, library attendance has increased by 20% and the current building has a leaking roof. The assumption is the foundation buried underground. It is the unstated belief that must be true in order for the evidence to support the claim. For example, the hidden assumption here is that public libraries are a valuable use of taxpayer money. If you don't believe that assumption, the whole argument falls apart for you. On the accuplacer, the questions will ask things like, which of the following, if true, would most weaken the author's argument? Or, what is an underlying assumption made by the author? Or, how does the author support the claim that the library is necessary? Let us dive deep into the specific types of evidence you will hear on the test. Knowing these types helps you evaluate how strong an argument is. The first type is statistical evidence. This involves numbers, percentages, and data. Authors use this to make their argument feel scientific and undeniable. But as a top-tier student, you must ask, is the statistic relevant? If I say we should build a library because 90% of people like the color blue, that is a statistic, but it has nothing to do with libraries. The accuplacer will often try to distract you with irrelevant statistics. The second type is anecdotal evidence. This is a story or a personal example. An author might tell a moving story about a child who learned to read at the old library. While this is emotionally powerful, it is logically weak because it is only one example. A strong argument needs more than just one story. The third type is expert testimony. This is when the author quotes someone with authority, like a professor, a scientist, or a doctor. This builds ethos or credibility. The fourth type is logical reasoning. This is when the author uses an if-then statement. If the library is the only place for free internet, and if free internet is necessary for job hunting, then the library is essential for the economy. Now, let us talk about the trap zone. The College Board has very specific ways of trying to trick you in the arguments module. The first major trap is the hidden assumption trap. This is often the hardest question on the whole test. They will ask you to find a necessary assumption. This is something the author never said, but they need it to be true. Imagine an argument that says, the new school uniforms will improve student grades because students will spend less time thinking about fashion. What is the hidden assumption? The author is assuming that thinking about fashion is the primary reason why students currently have lower grades. If students are actually failing because the textbooks are old or the teachers are tired, then the uniforms won't help. When you find a hidden assumption, you have found the ghost in the argument. To find it, ask yourself, what else would have to be true for this to make sense? The second trap is the weakener trap. The test will ask, which of the following would most weaken the argument? The trick here is that all four answer choices might be negative things, but only one of them actually attacks the logic of the argument. Let's go back to the school uniforms. Choice A says, some students think the uniforms are ugly. Choice B says, the uniforms are expensive for parents. Choice C says, A study showed that schools with uniforms have the same grade averages as schools without them. Choice A and B are bad things, but they don't prove the author's logic is wrong. Choice C is the weakener. It directly attacks the author's claim that uniforms improve grades. To find the weakener, you must find the answer that cuts the legs out from under the claim. The third trap is the straw man trap, thigh. S is when an author describes the other side's argument in a way that makes it look stupid or weak, so it's easy to knock down. If an author says, "People who oppose the new library just hate books and want the city to be illiterate," that is a straw man. They aren't addressing the real concerns of the opposition, like taxes or location. The accuplacer might ask you to identify a flaw in the author's reasoning, and failing to address the legitimate concerns of the opposition is a very common correct answer. The fourth trap is circular reasoning. This is when an author tries to prove a point by just saying it again in different words. For example, "The library is a great place because it is wonderful." That isn't an argument, it's just a circle. On the test, this is sometimes called begging the question. Now, let's talk about your active defense strategy. How do you attack these questions on Tuesday? You are going to use the counterargument test. As you read the passage, I want you to pretend you are the most annoying, skeptical person in the world. For every claim the author makes, I want you to mentally say, "Oh yeah, prove it." If the author says, "The new highway will reduce traffic," you say, "Prove it." Then look for the evidence. If the author provides a study from engineers, the argument is getting stronger. If the author just says, "Everyone knows it will," the argument is weak. By playing the skeptic, you will naturally spot the flaws and assumptions that the test is going to ask you about. Another technique for your audio learning is to identify the bridge. Logic is about building a bridge from the evidence to the claim. Imagine the evidence is on one side of a river. It is raining. Imagine the claim is on the other side. I should stay inside. The bridge is the logic, because I don't want to get wet. On the accuplacer, they will often give you evidence and a claim, but the bridge will be broken or missing. Your job is to find where that bridge is weak. If the evidence is "it is raining" and the claim is "I should buy a new car," the bridge is non-existent. There is no logical connection. This is called a non sequitur, which is Latin for "it does not follow." To summarize this deep dive into Module ACC RD 2.4. First, break every argument into the claim, the evidence, and the assumption. Second, identify the type of evidence. Is it a hard stat or just a story? Third, hunt for the hidden assumption, the thing the author needs to be true but didn't say. Fourth, use the skeptic technique to find the weak spots in the logic. And finally, beware of the straw man and circular reasoning traps. When you master the ability to analyze arguments, you are doing more than just passing a test. You are learning how to think critically, which is the single most important skill for college and for life. You'll start noticing these logic traps in news reports, in political speeches, and even in everyday conversations. Keep up the incredible work, mail carrier. You are covering miles on the street and miles in your mind at the same time. You are building the mental stamina of a top-tier student. That concludes our comprehensive breakdown of analyzing arguments. We have finished the rhetoric section. When you are ready to tackle how different texts talk to each other, our next target is Module ACC RD 3.1, Analyzing Multiple Texts. Just say the word "next," and we will begin.